The fire took everything from us, our home, our memories, our sense of safety. But our neighbor George, our sweet, wonderful George, he gave it all back by opening his doors to us. It wasn't until I found my own house key hidden in his desk that I realized he was the one who'd taken it all in the first place. It's funny how your world can shrink down to the size of a single brass key. One minute, you have a life, a husband you adore, a future you've meticulously planned out on Pinterest boards. The next, all you have is the smoky smell clinging to your clothes and the generosity of a neighbor. Our neighbor, George, was the kind of man everyone wishes they had living next door. Late 60s, with a kind, crinkly smile and a garden that was the envy of the entire block. He'd lived in the house next to mine since I was a little girl. My parents had adored him. When they sold me their house so my husband Noah and I could start our own family in it, George had been the first one at the door with a bottle of champagne and a plate of his famous chocolate chip cookies. He was the grandfather of the neighborhood, a fixture as reliable as the old oak tree on the corner. When his wife, Martha, passed away a few years back, the whole community wrapped their arms around him. We'd take turns bringing him dinners, shoveling his walk in the winter, and just sitting with him on his porch swing, listening to his stories. Noah, my husband, fell under George's spell just as hard as everyone else. Harder, even. Noah's own father had been a distant, critical man, and in George, he found the mentor and father figure he'd always craved. They'd spend hours in George's garage, tinkering with his vintage Mustang, a blur of grease, laughter, and shared advice. That man is a saint, Liv, Noah would say, wiping his hands on a rag. A genuine, bona fide saint. I never disagreed. Why would I? George was nothing but wonderful to us. He was our biggest cheerleader, always asking about my graphic design projects, always praising Noah's latest promotion at the firm. He was family. Then came the fire. It started in the dead of night, a faulty wire in the attic, the fire marshal said. An accident. A cruel, random twist of fate. I remember the screaming yell of the smoke alarm, the thick, acrid blackness, Noah grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the stairs. We made it out with nothing but the clothes on our backs and our two cats, who had miraculously shot out the door ahead of us. We stood on the lawn, wrapped in a neighbor's blanket, and watched as 29 years of my life, my childhood home, our marital home, was consumed by orange and black. The roof caved in with a sound that felt like my own ribs cracking. I just remember collapsing into Noah's arms, the world dissolving into a blur of sirens and grief. And through it all, there was George. He was there before the first fire truck arrived, his arm around my shoulder, his voice a steady, calming rumble. It's just stuff, Olivia, he'd whispered, his words a lifeline in the chaos. You're safe. You and Noah, you're safe. That's all that matters. He took us into his home without a second thought. He gave us his master bedroom, insisting he was perfectly comfortable in the guest room downstairs. He bought us new toothbrushes, pajamas, and clothes. He dealt with the insurance adjusters, his calm authority a balm on our frayed nerves. He told us to stay as long as we needed. This is your home now, he'd said, his eyes welling with what I thought were tears of pure empathy. Noah looked at him with such profound gratitude, his own eyes shining. I don't know what we'd do without you, George, Noah had choked out, and George had simply pulled him into a bear hug. You're the son I never had, he'd murmured. The first few weeks were a days of phone calls, paperwork, and shock. We moved through George's quiet, meticulously clean house like ghosts. He was our anchor. He'd make us breakfast every morning, a perfect soft-boiled egg and toast, just the way I liked it. He'd have a glass of wine waiting for Noah when he got home from a long day of meetings. He was patient, kind, and so incredibly supportive. But as the initial shock wore off, a deep, gnawing grief set in. Everything was gone. Photos, heirlooms, the little nicks in the door frame where my dad had marked my height each year. A month after the fire, the demolition crew had cleared the site, leaving a raw, empty patch of dirt where our life used to be. The fire chief had managed to salvage a few things from the garage, which had been detached from the house and only suffered smoke damage. A handful of soot-stained boxes sat in George's basement, a grim collection of what was left. George had brought them over himself, handling them with a reverence that made me cry. A few things to remember the good times by, he'd said gently. For weeks, I couldn't bring myself to look inside. The thought of sifting through the charred remains of our life was too painful. But one rainy Tuesday, while Noah was at work and George was at his weekly seniors bowling league, I knew I had to face it. I needed to find something, anything, to hold on to. I pulled on a pair of old gloves and headed down to the basement, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I just wanted to find my grandmother's locket or a photo album the smoke hadn't completely destroyed. I had no idea I was about to find the key to a nightmare I never knew I was living. George's basement was just like the rest of his house, unnervingly neat. Concrete floors painted a spotless gray, shelves lined with clearly labeled plastic bins, Christmas ornaments, gardening tools, Martha's things. Our scorched boxes were stacked in a corner, a messy intrusion in his perfect order. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and laundry detergent. I took a deep breath, knelt, and sliced open the tape on the first box with a utility knife. The top layer was a mess of warped books and melted plastic. My heart ached. This was a mistake. But I pressed on, my gloved fingers carefully lifting out debris. About halfway through the second box, amongst some of Noah's old college textbooks that had somehow survived, my fingers brushed against something small and cold. I pulled it out. It was a single key on a faded pink shoelace. My breath caught in my throat. I knew this key. It was the key to my childhood bedroom, the one I'd used to lock out my annoying younger brother. I hadn't seen it in at least 15 years. Why would it be in a box of Noah's college stuff? It made no sense. I told myself it was just a weird fluke. In the chaos of packing and unpacking over the years, things get jumbled. I slipped it into my pocket, a strange, unsettling feeling prickling at the back of my neck. I kept digging. In the third box, under a smoke-damaged blanket, I found a small, leather pouch. I opened it, and a cascade of keys spilled into my palm. My stomach lurched. There was the key to my first apartment in the city, the one with the bright yellow door. There was the key to my college dorm room, complete with the silly beaded lizard keychain my best friend had made me. And there, glinting under the dim basement light, was the key to our house. Not the one we used every day, but the spare I kept hidden under a fake rock in the garden. The rock George had given me as a housewarming gift. My mind started racing, trying to connect dots that I didn't want to connect. How could all these keys, from completely different times and places in my life, end up in the same box? A box that had been in our garage. It was impossible. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to settle over me. This wasn't a coincidence. I frantically tore through the remaining boxes, my search no longer for sentimental treasures but for I didn't even know what. At the bottom of the very last box, tucked inside an old gardening glove, was another key. This one was different. It was an old, ornate skeleton key. It looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. Then I saw the small, tarnished brass tag attached to it. It read, G.S. Desk. My blood ran cold. George's desk. Why would a key to George's desk be in a box of our belongings? I looked over at his workshop area on the other side of the basement. A heavy, antique roll-top desk stood against the far wall, a piece I'd always admired. He'd told me it belonged to his father. He kept his important papers in it, he'd said. I glanced at the stairs, my heart pounding against my ribs. He wouldn't be home for at least another hour. My hands were shaking, but I knew I had to open that desk. The collection of my life's keys in my pocket felt like a lead weight, pulling me toward a truth I was terrified to face. The key slid into the lock with a well-oiled click. I held my breath and slowly rolled back the top. The desk was as organized as the rest of his house. Neat stacks of bills, a cup full of pens, a framed photo of him and Martha. Everything looked perfectly normal. But my instincts screamed at me. I started opening the small drawers, one by one. Stationery, stamps, paper clips. Nothing. Then I pulled on the wide, central drawer. It was locked. I tried the key again, and it slid in perfectly. The drawer opened, and what I saw inside made the world tilt on its axis. It wasn't just one key, it was dozens. A whole, sprawling collection of my house keys from every place I had ever lived. My parents' house, my dorm, my first 3 apartments, and at least 5 different copies of the key to the house that was now a pile of ash. They were all meticulously labeled with tiny tags, noting the address and the years I'd lived there. Underneath the keys, however, was something far more sinister. It was a stack of thick, leather-bound journals. There were at least 10 of them, each with a year embossed in gold on the spine. The one on top read this year. With a trembling hand, I reached out and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was George's, that same elegant, sloping script from the birthday cards he'd given me every year. But the words were not from the kind, grandfatherly neighbor I knew. They were the words of a monster. The first sentence I read felt like a punch to the gut. She looked so beautiful today, watering the petunias. The sun caught the gold in her hair. She doesn't know it yet, but she's the reason I get up in the morning. She is my purpose. The entry was dated 2 weeks ago, before the fire. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My purpose. I flipped back a few pages, my fingers numb and clumsy. Every single entry was about me. What I wore, who I talked to, the fights I had with Noah that he could apparently overhear through the walls. He described my laugh, the way I bit my lip when I was concentrating on a design, the brand of coffee I drank. It was a meticulous, obsessive, moment-by-moment chronicle of my life, written by a man I thought was my friend, my protector. I grabbed an older journal from the bottom of the pile, the year corresponding to when I was in college. His obsession wasn't new. It was decades old. He wrote about my high school graduation, my first heartbreak, the day I moved out of my parents' house. He described watching me pack my car, feeling a pang of loss, but also a thrill at the new challenge. The challenge, he explained in horrifying detail, was making sure no one would ever take me too far away from him. He had followed me. He had rented apartments in the same neighborhoods, always keeping a comfortable distance, always watching. Then came the part that made my legs give out. I slid down to the floor, the journal clutched in my hands. It was an entry from 6 years ago. Introduced Olivia to the perfect candidate today. Noah. He's handsome, charming, a little naive. He looks at me with such admiration. He's malleable. He will anchor her here. He will build her a cage of comfort and security, and I will hold the key. I had to read it 3 times before the words sank in. George had introduced me to Noah. I had forgotten. He'd brought Noah, a junior associate from his old law firm, to our neighborhood block party. I thought it was a coincidence, a happy accident. But it was all a setup. My marriage, the love of my life, was an engineered event in George's sick, twisted narrative. Noah wasn't my husband, he was my keeper, handpicked by our jailer. My breath came in ragged gasps. I felt like I was going to be sick right there on his perfectly clean basement floor. I wanted to scream, to throw the journals, to burn them. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the sheer evil of it all. I flipped to the most recent journal, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the pages. I found the entry for the night of the fire. My eyes scanned the page, my mind screaming no, no, no. The time has come, he wrote. Noah is a good boy, but he is too self-sufficient. Her world is still too big. She needs to be brought back to the center, back to me. The house, with all its memories of her parents, of her life before him, it has to go. It's a shame to destroy such a beautiful home, but a phoenix must rise from the ashes. She must rise from the ashes and fly directly to me. A simple faulty wire, a little accelerant to help it along in the attic. They will never know. They will be broken, terrified, and lost. And I will be there to save them. She will finally be home. She will finally be mine. A strangled sob escaped my lips. He had started the fire. He had burned down my home, my entire history, my sense of security, all to get me into his. All to make me dependent on him. This man, who had held me while I sobbed over the ruins of my life, was the one who had lit the match. The grandfather of the neighborhood, the saint, was a predator who had been grooming me, manipulating my entire life, for decades. And my husband, my dear, trusting Noah, saw him as a hero. He was an unwitting accomplice, a pawn in George's terrifying game of chess. Suddenly, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway above. He was home. Early. My heart leaped into my throat. I shoved the journals back into the drawer, my movements frantic and clumsy. I locked it, my fingers fumbling with the key. I had to get out of the basement before he came down. I pocketed the ornate key and scrambled to my feet, my mind a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard the back door open. Liv, you home, sweetheart? It was Noah. He was home early, too. A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. But it was followed by a fresh wave of horror. I couldn't tell him. How could I? He loved George. He trusted him implicitly. He would never believe me. He would think the grief was making me crazy. He would defend George. He would tell him. And then what? I was trapped. I was living in the house of the man who had destroyed my life, and my own husband was my unwitting warden. I plastered a smile on my face, a mask of normalcy that felt like it was cracking under the strain. Hey, honey, I called out, my voice sounding impossibly high and thin. I was just looking for some old photos. The next few days were a special kind of hell. I lived in a state of hypervigilance, every nerve ending screaming. George's paternal pats on the shoulder felt like a brand, his kind words were dripping with poison. I watched him interact with Noah, the two of them laughing over dinner, discussing plans for rebuilding our house, and I felt a chilling, profound sense of detachment, as if I were watching a horror movie where I was the only one who knew the killer was in the room. Noah was completely oblivious. He'd talk for hours about George's generosity, how they would be forever indebted to him. We should make him the godfather to our first kid, he said one night as we were getting ready for bed. I just stared at him, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. I mumbled something noncommittal and turned away, feigning sleep, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the mattress. I knew I had to get out, but how? My phone, my laptop, my wallet, everything had been in the fire. George had graciously bought me a new phone, and Noah and I were now on his family plan. I had no doubt he was monitoring it. My car was a melted husk in the driveway. We were completely, utterly dependent on him for everything: food, shelter, transportation. He had engineered our helplessness perfectly. I was a prisoner in a cage I hadn't even seen being built around me. My only weapon was the knowledge locked in my head and the ornate key I had hidden in the lining of my new winter coat. My escape plan started to form in small, desperate pieces. I needed money, a phone he couldn't track, and a way out of town. I started stashing the cash George would give me for groceries, hiding it away. $50 here, 20 there. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The biggest obstacle was Noah. I loved him, but his blind devotion to George made him a liability. Trying to convince him would be a catastrophic mistake. He'd go straight to George, convinced I was having a breakdown, and my window of escape would slam shut forever. I had to leave him behind. The thought was a physical wound, a tearing pain in my chest, but what choice did I have? I had to save myself first. Maybe, once I was safe, I could find a way to show him the truth. I decided to make my move on a Thursday. It was the day George volunteered at the local library for a few hours in the morning, and Noah had an all-day off-site meeting an hour away. It was the longest stretch of time I knew I'd have alone. That morning, I made them both breakfast, my hands steady despite the tremor in my soul. I kissed Noah goodbye, a long, desperate kiss that he mistook for simple affection. "I love you, Liv," he said, smiling. "I love you too," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I watched George drive away in his pristine Mustang, then I flew into action. I grabbed my hidden cash, the key to his desk, and my coat. I went straight to the basement, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed proof. No one would believe this story without it. I unlocked the drawer and took the most recent journal, the one with the entry about the fire. It was a huge risk, but it was the only thing that could corroborate my insane story. I shoved it into my purse and ran back upstairs. I left a note for No on the bed. It was short, vague, and agonizing to write. "I'm so sorry. I have to go away for a while. I can't explain. Please don't worry. I'll call you when I can. I love you." It felt like a betrayal, but it was better than the alternative. My plan was to walk to the bus station downtown, about 5 miles away. It was far, but I didn't dare call a cab from the house. I was halfway down the block when a car pulled up beside me. My stomach plummeted. It was George. My blood ran cold. He rolled down the window, a pleasant, concerned smile on his face that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Olivia, where are you headed on a chilly morning like this?" I forgot my reading glasses, had to come back. My mind raced. He knew. He must have had a camera in the house, in the basement. Of course he did. He had thought of everything. "Just going for a walk," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Needed some fresh air." "Nonsense," he said, his smile tightening. "It's freezing. Hop in, I'll give you a ride wherever you're going." It wasn't a request. It was a command. My legs felt like lead as I walked around to the passenger side and got in. The car smelled of old leather and something sickeningly sweet, like air freshener trying to cover up a bad smell. As I clicked my seatbelt, I saw his phone in the center console. It was open to a tracking app, a little blue dot blinking on a map of our neighborhood. My blue dot. "You've been a very foolish girl, Olivia," he said, his voice losing all its warmth, replaced by a flat, chilling disappointment. "Did you really think I wouldn't know? After all I've done for you? After all the care I've taken?" He started driving, but not towards town. He was heading for the highway. My mind screamed. This was it. He was taking me somewhere to get rid of me. I looked at the man beside me, the man who had been a constant, comforting presence my entire life, and I saw a stranger. A monster. The journal in my purse felt like a block of ice against my hip. As he was merging onto the on-ramp, my instincts took over. I did the only thing I could think to do. I grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it hard to the right. The car swerved violently, tires screeching in protest. George yelled, a sound of pure rage, as he fought me for control. We careened across 2 lanes of traffic, the blare of horns a deafening chorus around us. The car slammed into the guardrail with a sickening crunch of metal. The airbag exploded in my face, filling the car with white powder and the smell of burnt chemicals. Everything went black for a second. I came to, dazed, my ears ringing. George was slumped against his own airbag, groaning. My door was jammed, but the window had shattered. I unbuckled my seatbelt, adrenaline surging through me, and scrambled out the broken window, ignoring the cuts from the glass. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran into the oncoming traffic, weaving through screeching cars, not caring about the danger. I just had to get away from him. I made it to the other side of the highway and collapsed on the grassy embankment, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. I looked back and saw him struggling to get out of the wrecked car. People were stopping, running to help. Someone was on the phone, probably calling 911. They thought they were helping an old man who'd been in an accident. They had no idea they were helping a monster. I had the journal. I had the truth. But as I sat there, watching the flashing lights approach in the distance, I knew this was far from over. I had escaped the house, but I would never truly escape him. His obsession had shaped my entire life, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he would never, ever let me go. What do you do when the villain of your story is also its author? Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.